King was almost Dr. Martin Luther King by default. I mean, I don't think he really necessarily wanted that position, but he got it. And he was, for all of us, the right person. And he took it seriously. He knew he was going to be killed.
You just start telling us about the first time you met Dr. King and what that was like and how you felt.
You know, the first time I saw Dr. King, I honestly don't remember whether I actually met him. He came to a high school gathering of kids from all over the country, and we were all discussing world affairs. It was all about nonviolence. And every year they had a speaker, and that year was Dr. King. So I just stood there and wept for the entire speech, because this man was doing what I had read about, you know, and studied about. And then all of a sudden there's this person talking about the bus boycott and people, you know, walking instead of riding. And so it was everything I'd read about was actually taking place. And I'm so overwhelmed still with that moment. I honestly don't remember whether I met him there. I was a 16-year-old kid along with all the rest of them. And I don't remember officially when I met him. I know it was at one of the conferences. We finally had a face-to-face. It was like you cut out the time to do that. And we started doing a lot of joking. So it's a healthy way to begin.
So let's talk about Grenada, and that was that the first, you know, in your experiences there, and the resistance to segregation.
My first experience in the South was 1961, and I went there and gave concerts, and the contract actually said, and I of course never looked at it, whites only. I was mortified. I went back the next year, 62, with that changed. Of course, no blacks came. They didn't know who I was. So I went back the third year and sang in black campuses. So I had already launched that feeling you get in the South when you're going to say something real.
So what brought you and King to Grenada?
Dr. King called to find out if I would go to Grenada because he couldn't get there on the right away. And he thought if the cameras were rolling, then maybe the whites would stop throwing rocks at the kids, which is what happened. The first day I was alone with my people and, you know, the marchers and the people, but not King. And so it did probably hold things off for a day, and then he came in the next day. And we were marching, and we have it in our films, to that giant cop on the corner. And I just stood there and said, we'd like these children to go to school, you know. He says, you can't go no further. And so I talked a little more about, you know, they wanted their education. You can't go no further. And somewhere on that march, I was walking with King, and I saw all of us and these kids. They ain't gonna let nobody turn me around. And across the street, these miserable-looking little clutch of white kids. And I went like this to King, and I said, "You sure you want to go through with this? That's what they're going to be in class with." And he says, "No, well, the cameras are rolling, Joan."
And how did you feel about walking down those streets with King and the kids?
I was elated walking down the street with King and the kids, because I remember one of the young preacher, his sermon was called Singing at Midnight, and it ended up saying, everybody's going to join us because this is where they're going to want to be. You know, this is anybody with any kind of ideals or desire to do something was going to come to be with us, because it was joyful and it was strong and it was full of music and there was danger, and so what, you know. It was Grenada where Dr. King was really, really tired after coming in, and they had put him to bed in this, you know, the master bedroom, which is a small, humble, little, lovely place, and nobody wanted to wake him up, and he was due to speak. And so I went into the room, and I just remember as I was looking at a chocolate drop on this pillow. Everything in the room was white doilies, white sheets, and there was Black King. And so I sang Swing Low, and he didn't wake up. He just rolled over and he said, I believe I hear the sound of an angel. Let's have another one, Joan. So,
But can you talk about, like, as a person, his personality a little bit?
first of all, when he was speaking, he didn't really dare do much humor because there were so many eyes on him and so many critics and people ready to, I mean, it would have been, ha, he's just joking around, he's not serious. So you really didn't see much of that in his speeches and his public presence. Dr. King knew how moved I was when he spoke, and he said at one point, I always say nonviolence once or twice extra when I know Joan Baez is in the audience. It makes her cry. And it did. I mean, I just fell apart when he started his what he did. King was almost Dr. Martin Luther King by default. I mean, I don't think he really necessarily wanted that position, but he got it. And he was, for all of us, the right person. And he took it seriously. He knew he was going to be killed.
Could you, this is hard, but could you tell us about the moment you heard about his assassination?
I don't know where I was. I was in a hotel room somewhere, and I completely went into denial. They said, are you going to go to the funeral? I said, oh, no, I don't go to funerals. I didn't feel anything until 10 or 15 years later. And I was here in this house watching a documentary came on about Dr. King. I thought, well, I'll watch this. I just dissolved. My son remembers walking through the room wondering what had happened to his mother. I was just devastated. And all the feelings that I might have had back then, I was having 10 years later. It was just too overwhelming.
In the history books, we celebrate these, the Montgomery bus boycott, the Selma March. Why do you think it's important to think about, to discuss and study his later struggles, his later fights?
I think discussing and admitting to King's later fights or anything, whether it was depression or his foibles, I think it makes a difference in whether you're looking at somebody who's unattainable. What he does is like in another world. I think when they become human, I think it's very important for us to see that you can go on doing the good works and have slipped and fallen, or gotten drunk or womanized or whatever he was into doing. Again, since we have no idea really what that feels like, we don't have any room to criticize it.
How do you think that your friendship with Dr. King changed the course of your life?
Dr. King is one of the most important people who moved me beyond being a student of nonviolence to being a practitioner, beyond just whatever stubbornness I was showing at home. I refused to stand up and salute this flag and all that. By the way, King and I always had this fight over the state of America because the war was going on, and I thought this place was pretty decadent, and he would give his speech about wanting their share of the American pie. And I would say, pie is really not very tasty right now. And we'd always have this fight about it because that was part of his speech. 3 or 4 people made an impact on my life the way Dr. King did. To really care about him. There are people I've admired, haven't gotten that close to, and I was able to get close to him. And again, it was seeing nonviolence in action that, won my heart and made me want to go work with him and be with him.
And how about to this day? How do you think? Why do we need those lessons today?
What's going on in the world today is beyond anything anybody could have imagined. It's so corrupt, and of course we need those voices. It's hard to hear them when the right wing owns the press, So we need. I would say that right now, we need to understand the power of nonviolence, because to try and anything other than that right now is self-defeating and treacherous. I always felt that the world was close to falling apart. And that's, of course, obviously how I feel now. But I had the understanding from when I was about 12 that adding to the violence was not going to do anything. It was not going to help anybody, any side. So I just took a path then. I took it and I never really left it. It's the only thing that made any sense to me. So I knew that for the most part, people wouldn't know what I was talking about. They would think I was nuts. They would belittle it. They would give you the what would you do if scenarios in which you can't get out alive. And you have to just know all that stuff and keep walking.
And in retrospect, how do you feel that nonviolence has fared?
I don't think nonviolence has even had a chance to come into its own, except a couple of times. And it may not, because it's difficult. You know, I guess Gandhi said that the human psyche is both violent and nonviolent. And the question is, which one are you going to organize? So after all these years of violence, and people are just addicted to it, they can't make themselves think another way. So, and in the atmosphere we're in now, so the year of the bully, it's even harder to try and present something other than either being a liberal, which isn't enough, being a progressive, which hasn't really pulled itself together in a way that it can make itself understood. Right now I have this little saying, it's little victories and big defeats, because we're living in a big defeat. I mean, we're living, but our background scenario is global warming. So that's not exactly a leg up, for kids. So that's there, and you have to do everything in spite of that. And then the bully comes along, and everything gets worse every single day. Things get worse for the majority of the people in this country. Most of them don't even understand that yet. So it's against that scenario that we need to be very inventive and very imaginative to find our way through it, and very dedicated.
Do you have hope right now, or on the hope scale, how do you?
Well, on the hope scale, I've never been very hopeful. On the other hand, I'm not hopeful about the state of the world. I am hopeful about people's resilience and what we can do if we really want to do it. And I think courage is the most important of all the virtues, to be courageous. And courage is contagious. I mean, violence is contagious, but guess what? So is courage. And so if you've experienced nonviolence in its various forms, it can also be contagious. If you have a moment to see what it's actually doing and see that it's possible, and see that it's not soft, that it's not weak, it's very strong. You can refer to it as fighting, battling, but just different tools. They're different tools.